One time, 2 weeks past the start of deer season, I decided to venture into the wilderness in an area I saw while doing a little electronic scouting on Google Earth. The area I wanted to get to is public land that is surrounded by private ranches, so I sleuthed around to get some information on the big ranches. Eventually, I contacted a rancher and I got permission to travel across their land to the mountains and forests. But of course, there were conditions. They said I could only hike or ride a bicycle through their land, and I could not start any fires on their land. Very reasonable conditions for free passage and hunting permission. So with permission attained, I prepped the gear for my trip, getting everything I needed strapped onto my mountain bike. With my gear ready to go, I was up at 4:30 a.m. and out the gates of the ranch by 5:30. It had rained the night before, so any tracks I saw would be new and my movement would be muffled. A great hunting day in the making. I saddled up my bicycle and rolled onto the dirt road. Before I go on with the story, I will say that I'm not a novice outdoorsman. I've put many hundreds of miles under my heels in swamps, deserts, snowy mountains, and open fields. Although I dislike it, I've done plenty of trips alone and I'm no stranger to the ill effects of fatigue, and never have I experienced anything similar to this situation. The first mile I rode on a well-traveled dirt road, passing through open pasture with plenty of grazing cattle on the hillsides and upon the plains. Once at the foothills of the mountains there was a fork in the road, with one path going steeply off to the right and on top of a hill which evolved into a ridgeline. The other path gently inclined to the left and into a tight-sloped canyon. My intuition told me to go to the left since the canyon floor had probably been leveled by years of water travel and floods, making it a smooth and simple ride. Boy, was I wrong. The canyon was overgrown in many places with groves of aspens and rabbit brush. Sometimes the aspens were so thick in the tight confines of the canyon they blocked the sky. In the tight turns of the canyon, sediment had piled up into small but very steep muddy hills. In 2 spots, the canyon opened up into a larger clearing about 1.5 acres in size. It was in these spots that I found a few cattle resting and grazing. It was at the end of the second clearing that I came to a spot I will call the Straits. Massive cliffs from both sides of the canyon lowered, and then converged to a bottleneck that was only about 20 feet wide. As I approached the Straits, I was impressed by the geological formation and I took a picture. When I got to the mouth of the Straits, I had my first moment of what I will call distress. It was almost like I had crossed a threshold of some kind. When I went to step through the Straits, a massive sudden gust of wind blew, knocking me off balance. At the time, I was surprised and taken aback. For a moment, I felt like someone was slamming a door in my face, as if it was done intentionally to make me feel unwelcome. After the surprise faded, I thought a gust from a mountain pressure system must have blown through the canyon and been amplified by the sudden bottleneck where I stood. Just coincidental timing. The original thought faded entirely, and I didn't even reflect on it until the next day. I was out deer hunting, and that was at the front of my mind. As I went through the final stretch of the Slot Canyon, the sky darkened and the wind increased, blowing into my face. Again, just a storm rolling in, which I was ready for and welcomed. I was downwind, so the deer would never smell me coming. I hit the end of the trail at a third, very large opening and pasture where 6 cows were grazing. To my right was a large uphill canyon where I had planned on hunting. There I planned to ditch my bike and hike up the steep ridges and mountainside on foot, looking for the canyon below for deer while also scanning the slopes. The area of the forest and mountains was far from any sign of roads or humans, other than the trail cutting through the canyon I had rode through, used for herding cattle. I hid my bike and took off on foot. In the next several hours, I did my scouting and hunting. I didn't have much luck with the hunting, and the day had grown late now. I had put in some 3 miles of intense biking and another 3 of extremely difficult hiking on nearby vertical slopes with my gear. Also, frost had come in a few hours before, and it was freezing the moisture of my breath into my beard and mustache, and I did not want to risk getting stuck in a storm. This late in the day, there was no way I'd be packing a carcass out in my exhausted state. I sat on a ridge, ate some food, and stood up to leave. About halfway back to my bike, I began to get a creeping suspicion that I was being watched. I had no reason to feel that way. I heard no noises, nor saw anything alarming, but a feeling of paranoia began to invade my mind. It was so subtle I hardly noticed. When I reached my bike, I felt distress at the fact that I had to resituate my pack and strap it down before I could ride. I questioned myself and literally paused and mentally asked myself why I was so upset right now, and I immediately had the realization and feeling that I was being followed. Panic shot through me like electricity. Before I knew what I was doing, I instinctively snatched my rifle from the tree I had leaned it upon. I flicked off the safety and scanned all 360 degrees around me. Nothing was there at all, but I couldn't shake the feeling. In fact, the feeling evolved, and I began to feel dread. I felt a cold, suffocating recognition that something terrible or evil had found me. I didn't know what this something was, but I decided to throw my gear on my back and get out from the trees at the mouth of the canyon and awkwardly ride out to the clearing and sit by the cows. If something was hunting me, maybe the cows would see it first while I was saddling up and give me a warning, or maybe one of them would get pounced on instead of me. As I got close to the cows, they backed up a little bit, but stayed nearby and watched as I strapped my pack down. I looked up to scan to see where the cows were looking. Some looked at me, some looked at the canyon I had come from, and a calf was munching grass and paying no mind at all. In a few minutes I was packed, and I checked my map to see if there was an alternative route out. My instincts told me that going back the way I came would not be a good choice. Sure enough, the path I had chosen not to take earlier in the day led around over the same clearing I was in. This new path was longer though, and I would have to climb to the summit of a steep and large hill first. On the positive side, once I got to the peak, it would all be downhill, and I could quickly cruise away from whatever I felt was following me. The hill was steep and muddy, and the air was freezing and dry, but the ground was wet. My muscles were burning as I pushed my bike up the slope and slipped around in the mud. At one point on the ascent, I paused to breathe, and I heard a soft sound behind me in the distance. I wheeled around, and there about 60 yards behind me were the 6 cows, frozen, staring at me. I was relieved for a second, and then realized how odd it was. I knew that packs of animals will often follow a lead animal into a dangerous area, and trail off at a distance in case the leader gets pounced on. Reflecting now, I think it was ironic they were doing that, given that I was using them as bait only a bit earlier. As I mused at the possibility, I turned to continue walking, and saw something in the woods to my left that confirmed my suspicion. There was a skeleton of a cow, well over a year old, about 30 yards into the aspens forest. With that, I wheeled my rifle from my back to my chest, and moved it from full safety to half safety and kept going uphill. I paused several more times for breath, and every time I turned, the cows were there, frozen, staring at me, following me up the hill. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the peak. As I cleared the forest, I saw other cows at the peak grazing on grass. I paused to breathe, and the cows who had been following me passed me up and joined their companions. That sign gave me relief, and I felt safe again as I cruised my bike down the hill all the way down to the ranch and back to my car. I threw my bike on the back and went home. That night while I was sleeping, I had a nightmare. The feeling of dread returned, and a voice in my head appeared telling me never to go back to that hunting spot again. The voice sounded like mine, but felt like someone else. The message was clear though. Only bad things awaited me if I returned there. Not wanting to test this, I accepted whatever this something was telling me. In the time since this all occurred, I've reviewed that day in my mind as well as the pictures that I took during the first half of the day. I realize now that creeping sensation of paranoia had been making its way into my mind since the moment I entered the canyon to the left. My mind was still so focused and excited on getting out to hunt that I didn't recognize my state of paranoia until later. Part of me felt fear from potential physical harm, but the dread that came upon me that day and that night were something spiritually evil. I've hunted in bear, wolf, and bobcat territory many times in my life, and I've never felt that feeling I had that day before. As I said before, I've had plenty of solo trips in my free time where I've been alone in the middle of the wilderness on my own before, but felt absolutely nothing like I did that day. Something was following me, something was trying to get me, something unnatural. I don't know how any of the other stuff that I saw that day ties in, like the cow carcass or the following cows. I don't know if they even tie in at all. This could all just be a weird case of mania that I came down with, but what I do know is that I'm never going back to hunt on that land. I'm a retired man now, but back in my youth, my pals and I were big hunters. We went out to Wyoming once, looking to hunt in the true wilderness. The forests around us were nice for hunting, but fell short of hunting that could be done in other areas such as Wyoming. None of us had ever been to this part of the wilderness before, so we made a trip out. When we got there to hunt, our strategy was to walk in parallel lines to each other about a half-mile apart. The idea was that if anything went wrong, we could send out a warning signal. That way, someone would be able to come and help, which was important because we were deep into the forest, alone with no other hunters or people. I started my walk that morning with no real worries. I walked for a couple of miles, seeing nothing but small animals. I had my rifle with me and kept my eyes open looking for big game. After a while, I noticed something. It had become very quiet around me, and the usual background noises of the forest were gone. No birds singing or squirrels chattering in the trees. I stopped and listened for a second, trying to figure out what was going on. It was like a heavy, unnatural silence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Little did I know that when I stopped walking to listen for the forest, I had become an easier target. I heard something behind me, maybe 20 feet away. The sound of something moving fast, with heavy footfalls. I didn't even fully have time to turn around before I saw a grizzly bear was on me. The grizzly was so quick that I didn't even have time to shoot, and I was instantly in survival mode for my life. All I remember after that instance was putting up my rifle towards my head and neck area as my only shot at self-defense. I was trying to keep the bear away with my rifle. It had to have been only a few seconds that the grizzly was on me before I heard gunshots. My pal had saved me from being mauled to death by a grizzly bear. The pal who was the closest to me was walking about a half-mile off in that parallel line when he had seen the grizzly stalking me. My pal had closed the half-mile gap just in time to save my life. My life really did come down to the seconds out there in the wilderness, because I know it would have not taken that grizzly long at all to kill me. Even in my old age now, I think about that moment often, and am very thankful that I came away with no lifelong lasting damage, and the only injuries I sustained were healable. It's easy to forget how thin the line is between predator and prey when you're out there in the true wild. It doesn't matter how prepared you are and how well you think you know the land. That hunting trip was a reminder to me that when you're out there in the wilderness, you're not always at the top of the food chain. I was hiking in the Olympic National Forest a few years ago by myself and my 2 dogs. We were 4 days in, around 20 miles at least from a known mountain road. I was camping at around 7,000 feet that night, or right where the tree line started thinning out. So when I got to the campsite, which was a big open meadow on top of a secondary mountain, it was about an hour from sunset. My big dog usually runs around within proximity of the camp as I put up the tent and make dinner, but I noticed that this time it was a little different. He kept staring up at this steep tree-filled mountainside, tail straight up and barking. Not the bark when he sees marmots or other small animals, but unsure, concerned barks. Now, the day before, I had found a note left under a rock at the last landmark. It was saying that there was a problem bear in the area that was harassing a party of campers a few days ago. I myself had seen big cat tracks the day before, so I was rightfully concerned that this may be more than just ground squirrels. I decided to go climb some of the boulders at the foothill while I took my time looking up the hillside for movement before I went to go hang my bear bag up there. I didn't see or hear anything, but my dog kept quietly whining like there was something over there. I was still concerned as I started hiking up this steep hill to hang the bag. It was so steep that I had to use the trees to balance and lean against so I didn't go tumbling down before making another 5 or 6 step push to the next tree I could lean against. Anyways, I was slowly making it up this hill, hopping from tree to tree to keep my balance. Then I got about 100 feet up the hill, and I heard a whole lot of big movement about 50 feet in front of me. My dog immediately went from a deep low growl to a savage slobber flying everywhere type of barking now. My heart started pounding out of my chest and I began to panic. A million thoughts raced through my head in a matter of seconds. If this was a bear, my dog was going to try to save my life and he would most likely die. If I had to get off the hillside fast, I was 100% going to trip and fall off the 12 to 15 foot cliff onto the boulders below. My other smaller dog I had zipped in the tent was also going crazy down below me. So I was feeling pretty screwed about then. A few seconds later, I kinda snapped back into it, and I took another few steps to start to put my survival priorities in order and call my dog back to me. He came and sat against my feet as my back was against a tree, so I was kinda pinned and stuck there for the moment. My dog was seemingly trying to separate me from something up there, so I let him lean against me while I tried to collect myself. This is when I realized I had completely forgot that I had my headlamp off. I reached up so fast to turn my lamp on, I basically punched myself in the face. I got my lamp on and peered up the hillside. I figured I'll at least get a reflection off the eyes of whatever's up there. I looked around, but saw nothing. But something had clearly been right there. Both my dog and I heard it. Whoever it was didn't get away or sound like they had made it too far. I knew something was there. so I was kinda just steadfast at that point. I needed to know what was up there because I had to sleep there tonight, and out in the wilderness completely alone, I wanted to know what I was up against. Better to face it than wait like a sitting duck all night was my thought process. As I was looking up the hill, my dog at one point lunged forward, unpinning me. He did a bluff charge up the hill about 15 feet, and he was snarling and foaming at the mouth. As he did this, I finally saw movement. Something moving up and breaking the line of the sun-setting horizon. My dog's bluff had made whatever it was blow its cover. I called my dog back and silently watched, and what I saw made my heart completely drop. There was a man crouched about 75 feet directly in front of me. He wasn't wearing camel clothes, but had on some raggedy thing with a hood that blended into the environment perfectly, almost like a makeshift ghillie suit with his face exposed. I couldn't see his eyes, and his face was covered in dirt or something, but I knew that we were staring right at each other in that moment. I stared back for a few moments without saying any words. I felt like I was trying to subconsciously convey that I was going to stand my ground. I wanted him to know that I saw him, but I guess I was just too shaken to speak. I did have to get off of that hill before total dark, or I could be seriously hurt trying to get back down. So carefully, I started heading down with my dog, who didn't want to leave, but listened. Periodically, I would step with my back against a tree holding me up, and I would look in that direction again, just to make it even more clear that I saw him. Eventually, I made it back to the tent near the boulders at the bottom of the hill. In a mixture of being terrified, angry, and feeling the need to do something, I reached into my bag and pulled out my .40 pistol. I fired a single shot into the air as the sun was setting as a warning, then climbed into my tent without eating and laid with my gun next to me until first light. As soon as the sun came up, I packed up my gear and left back down the mountain. It was dark by the time I made it to the last camp, about 4 miles from my vehicle. Thankfully, there were other people there. We sat around a fire they made, and I felt pretty relieved and safe. They told me they were planning to head that way where I was the night before in the morning. I told them my story in detail, and needless to say, we both walked back to our cars the next morning. The thing that still creeps me out to this day, though, is when I got home and started reading reviews of the same hike I was on, other people had similar experiences to mine as well. There was even a man found dead from a fall on that same boulder range 2 years ago, and a woman found murdered last year. Not saying that these events are all correlated to what I saw, but they very well could have been. It was so random and scary to see a person hiding like that in the middle of the wilderness, far away from any city or road. I live in southern Oregon, which is really scenic, filled with some of the most beautiful forests one will ever see. The national forest that I live near and I know like the back of my hand was a common hiking and camping spot for me. I've heard many stories about places in the middle of the wilderness that have strange names, and that often draws me to these places to explore if I haven't been before. These forests also have things about them that are off, though I've never experienced anything strange. Locals talk about how people disappear all the time in the woods, sometimes over drugs, sometimes over foul play, and other times people just go for a hunt or hike and are never seen again. I've spent years in the deep wilderness hiking almost every day. The incident I'm about to tell you changed how I feel about the forest close to my home. My roommate and I left our home on the outskirts of the forest to hike to a place that's basically a swamp. It is a small area of marshy swamp in a bowl-like area surrounded by mountains. There's one road in and one road out. As we climbed the mountain, the rain had started picking up, and it had been lightly raining mostly all day, but living in the Pacific Northwest, you get used to that and it doesn't stop you from adventure. We finally got to the flat swamp part and it was time to explore. We walked the trail into the flats, and as we admired the old growth trees surrounding the marsh, the wind started to pick up. There was a nasty storm coming in. The trees started to rock back and forth and make horrible snapping sounds. There aren't many safe places in a forest like this to take shelter from falling trees and branches, so we decided it was time to hike out. We hiked back to the car, and we were relieved to get in and out of the storm. The car was parked in a small turnout on the side of the road. We sat there for a few moments in the car, taking off our jackets and turning the heat on and such. That's when a truck pulled up. In the middle of the bad storm, in the complete middle of the wilderness, a really old beat-up pickup truck drove up and parked in front of our car. The truck wasn't completely blocking our car, but it was pretty close. A burly man stepped out of the driver's door and turned, looking at us. I have to say, this is the only time in my entire life that I've thought to myself, something here isn't right. The look on that guy's face gave me that instinctual fear of fight or flight. As we watched him walk around his truck, I told my roommate to just go and pull out now. The car was already running, so my roommate didn't question me and began to pull out. The man was reaching behind the seat of his truck and pulled out a long rifle. That's when my roommate fully hit the gas and we flew out of there. As we pulled down the road, the man took his gun and pointed it in our direction, but he never shot a bullet as far as I know, just aimed at our car the whole time until we were out of sight. We got home, told our neighbors about the incident, and proceeded about our day. When we got into the car the next morning to drive to town, the starter failed in our car. I often think to myself, had the starter failed out there in the wilderness, or had the bad storm not come and made us go home early, things could very well have gone south that day. I live in Utah and spend nearly every weekend I can out exploring the state's West Desert for the last decade or so. It's mostly an absolutely empty no man's land, full of abandoned mines, grazing sheep, and military test ranges. One area in particular is a small mountain range that I travel near often. I'm obsessed with it, and probably know this range possibly better than any other person alive. I've hiked every prominent peak, driven every side canyon, hiked every major abandoned mine. This just sets the stage for how familiar and experienced I am with the area. The range sits next to the famous Bonneville Salt Flats. If you're not familiar with it, this is a dry alkaline lake bed covering nearly 50 square miles. It's one of a few wide-open spots on Earth long enough to hold annual races where the world's land speed records have been set at nearly 800 miles per hour. When they're not holding this annual race week, you're free to drive out onto the flats wherever you want. It's a surreal experience to camp out there, so I do it frequently, almost always alone. There's a particular spot on the flats I like to go out to camp. It's flat and as remote gets, literally 10 miles from the nearest road, hill, bush, or even rock. You have to imagine intuitively that if you see anyone else out there at all, you tend to stay away. You have no idea what motivations other people have for being out there. They could be transporting drugs, hiding a body, or whatever. When camping out in an area that's remote, it's best to remain cautious. That being said, I've never been bothered in the decade of doing this, never heard bad news stories, and no one else has ever come within miles of me. On the most silent days, you can hear a passenger car approaching from several miles away. About 5 years ago now, I went out to the same familiar spot to camp. It was exactly 104 degrees Fahrenheit that day, so I had a large, orange sun shelter stocked up next to my trunk. It was pin-drop silent all day, to the point where your ears sort of rung a bit. The heat baked the salty surface so much that it was all curled up everywhere, forming these crunchy rolls of texture. They were unavoidable walking around, and made a loud, satisfying crunch sound. I didn't see a single other car on the horizon in any direction all day. All I heard was the rumble of a train nearly 10 miles away. Around 7 p.m., I fell asleep for a nap under my sun shelter. I woke up naturally about an hour later. I stood up to stretch and spun slowly around, fully surveying my 360-degree view, seeing nothing for miles and no signs of life. It was about 45 minutes until the sun set behind the mountains, but plenty of light to see clearly, still about 100 degrees and dead silent. Whenever I'm out there in that wilderness, I always carry a pistol with me strapped onto my backpack. I want it to be accessible with my backpack on and also visible if I ever come across creeps on my hike. I started to chop wood I'd brought for a campsite for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, about 30 feet away from my truck and sun shelter. Suddenly, between chops, I heard something behind me that sounded like the fabric of my shelter rustling. It took my brain an odd half-second to process it, because I hadn't really heard anything besides myself all day and the air was dead silent. I quickly spun around and there was a girl there. I absolutely froze and my blood drained into my feet. She was only maybe 50 yards away, walking sort of towards my camp, but slightly diagonally across the front of my truck. She was headed in the direction of further wilderness. What I'd heard was actually her footsteps loudly crunching the salty texture on the ground I mentioned earlier. She wasn't looking directly at me, and she was just walking at a normal pace. She appeared to be roughly 18 years old, wearing a homemade tie-dyed t-shirt and jean shorts. She was wearing Converse sneakers, not running or hiking shoes. She had no water or backpack, not even a hat or even sunglasses, and she was walking directly towards the setting sun in 100-degree heat. She didn't look disheveled in any way, or not even remotely tired, so I had a rough time processing what was happening for the first several seconds. I quickly scanned the horizon behind her for another person or car or anything, but there was nothing there, just her. I stood up, put the axe down, and blurted out something dumb like, "Hot day for a walk, isn't it? Is everything all right?" I was shaking, absolutely flabbergasted at what she was doing, and how and why had she made it practically next to me without me hearing or seeing her approach? Without even really turning her head to look at me, and while still walking now almost next to my truck, she replied, "My friends are right there." She motioned behind her back with her thumb. There was nothing behind her as far as I could see, many miles. She continued on past my camp towards the mountain range miles away to the northwest. I was so surprised to have human contact in such a remote spot, and so suddenly, that I really had nothing to say. By the time I thought to offer her water or ask if she was okay again, she was almost 150 yards away, but I could still hear her crunchy footsteps as if she was right next to me. I grabbed my binoculars and just stared intently as she continued on. I fully expected her to vaporize into some mirage, or for me to wake up in my chair again. My jaw was on the ground in shock. I sat against my truck for a full 15 minutes, never taking my eyes off her in the binoculars. She never once looked back at me or changed her pace. She had to have been nearly a mile away at that point, and I could still hear her crunching footsteps plain as day. As the sun was setting now, she started to slightly blend into the darker mountain range on the horizon. Then I heard her phone ring. The sound carries very well in the flat, empty wasteland. I did not have cell service myself, but through the binoculars I saw her reach into her pocket, and even heard the faint murmur of her talking. She was on the phone for maybe a minute and just kept walking. About a minute after that, I suddenly began to hear a car behind me. I spun back around, and there were headlights on the opposite horizon, maybe 3 miles away, coming towards me. The engine noise was loud, and I could tell they were traveling fast. I was starting to get super paranoid, like this was some sort of a setup or a recon at my camp, and a wide variety of other slightly irrational things. I didn't know if I was being robbed or messed with in some other way, so I took cover behind my truck and waited. It looked like they were driving right at me, very fast. Not a minute later, and the car went sailing past my camp, rudely kicking up a huge dust cloud headed in the vague direction of the girl. It was a late 90s Range Rover. Despite all their windows being open and them being only 50 yards away, they were doing at least 50 miles per hour, and it was getting dark, so I couldn't identify any passengers. I could no longer see the girl. A short while later, I saw their taillights approach roughly where I lost track of the girl, and then I saw brake lights. Then headlights, then brake lights, and repeat like they were spinning donuts on the salt. Then I saw headlights again, and I heard the engine rev back up loudly. They were racing back towards me now. Again, I took cover behind my truck, and at this point chambered a round into my gun, because I was convinced that this was somehow going to end badly for me. A minute later, the same thing happened. They went flying past my camp in the direction they had come from, fortunately without stopping, but even faster and closer than the first pass. It was certainly some type of a signal message to me. I could have had a kid or a dog running around or something. It was very dangerous. After another couple minutes, their taillights disappeared over the horizon in the direction of the nearest town. I didn't know what to do or think. Nothing I'd witnessed was technically illegal, and it made no sense at all. I had so many unanswered questions in my mind. What was the girl doing out there 10 miles on foot from anything? My immediate thought was that she was some kind of an endurance athlete training for an Ironman race or something. But she was too young and wasn't dressed right and had no supplies. Maybe she had gotten into a fight with her parents or friends while driving around the flats and had stomped away from them for a couple hours. Why did she approach my camp alone, with me, another stranger, obviously swinging an axe and wearing a gun? How did I not hear her approach? Was she being trafficked or something worse? Why wouldn't she have asked me for help or showed some concern on her face? Since I had no cell service, I couldn't report it. Even so, the likelihood that I would be able to point out their location or anything useful to 1 or 2 sheriffs that patrol the area was very low. I immediately decided to move my camp though. I thought maybe they would come back, or maybe they marked my location as they drove past. I set up my camp again about 10 miles away, higher in the foothills of the mountains. I was hoping for a cell signal up there, but had nothing. I went to bed and called the sheriff the next morning as I got back into town. I gave them the story and the description of the girl. They didn't sound concerned, and I have never heard anything since. The creepiest part to me is how I didn't hear her until she was within 50 yards, even though I could hear her walking nearly a mile away later. Maybe this was all just a very elaborate hallucination that happened to me, but it all looked and sounded very real. I guess I'll never know what strange thing was going on that night. This happened just last summer. I live by myself in what I would describe as a typical apartment. I have one bedroom, a bathroom, kitchen, and living room pretty much. It's inside of a building in a fairly large apartment complex. So one night, I worked sort of late into the night at my job. I was really tired from the long day and pretty much just arrived home, took a quick shower, and went to bed. That was around midnight. However, I woke up at roughly 4 o'clock in the morning. Obviously, I wanted to get more sleep, but I was wide awake. I was also very thirsty and felt dehydrated. Sometimes, mostly in the summer, I wake up in the night because of dehydration, and obviously on this night I had worked late and not been able to drink as much. Then usually I drink some water and feel better immediately and then go right back to sleep. But some of the times when I wake up, I'm wide awake and can't go back to sleep right away, and this was one of those times. So what I usually do when that happens is get up and go into the living room and watch TV until I get sleepy again. That might be 15 or 30 minutes usually. So that was what I did on this night. I got out of bed, drank some water, immediately felt better, and then sat on the couch and turned on the TV. My couch is to the right of the front door to the apartment, about 20 feet away. I remember that when I sat down, I glanced over and happened to notice that my door was actually unlocked. I realized that I somehow had forgotten to lock it. Normally, I always remember, but I guess I forget sometimes. I went over and locked the door and then went back to the couch. I started watching TV and waited for myself to feel sleepy again. I was flipping around the channels for maybe 5 minutes when suddenly I heard a noise. Obviously, it was very quiet other than the noise from the TV, but the sound I heard was somebody trying to open the front door to my apartment. I really couldn't believe it, and I had no idea who it could be. I sat and listened, but didn't hear anything else. Then, after a moment, I got up and I walked over to the door. I looked out of the peephole, but nobody was there. Then I opened up my apartment door and looked into the hallway. That's when I saw him. There was a man wearing a hooded sweatshirt walking away from me down the hallway. He was mostly looking down at the ground, and then he went to another door and tried opening it, but this one was also locked. I watched him go to another door and try that one as well. Apparently, he hadn't noticed me opening the door. I didn't know who this guy was, but he was seemingly trying to get into any apartment. As he reached the end of the hallway, he suddenly looked behind him and then he saw me. When he did, I quickly closed the door. I was afraid that he would come back, but he didn't. Soon after, I went back to bed. I'm really glad that I woke up when I did that night and locked my door, or who knows what could have happened. One time, I was home by myself and watching TV. I was very relaxed, sitting on the couch in the living room and just enjoying a movie. The volume was kinda loud on the TV, and I was having some popcorn. To that point, I had been home for several hours, and it was a good night. As the movie went on, I remember that there was a really quiet part. Just during that, I thought I heard the sound of something coming from the other room. It got my attention, and I was slightly concerned for a moment, until I realized it was probably just my cat. He was always moving around the house, so I didn't pay it much thought. Several minutes later, though, at another quiet spot in the movie, I heard the sound from the other room again. It just didn't really sound like my cat, but what else could it be? I looked around, and then I saw that my cat was sleeping on the living room floor in the same room as me. That made me realize that the sound I heard in the other room was not the cat. I got a bad feeling, wondering what it could be. I paused the movie and listened closely. When I did though, I stopped hearing anything for about a minute or two. Then I heard something again. It sounded like somebody was quietly walking through the kitchen, farther away. I couldn't see that area of the house from where I was. I stayed where I was on the couch, wondering if I should call the police or what. For several minutes though, I didn't hear anything more. So at that point, I was wondering if I had gone crazy or if a person was actually in my house. I hadn't heard anything in a while, so I decided to just go to my kitchen and look. When I walked over there, things were still quiet. Then, as I reached the end of the living room, I heard somebody walking again. Whoever was in my house quickly made their way to the basement door and then opened it. As I looked into the room, I just barely saw the door closing and then heard someone going down the stairs. This confirmed me that an intruder was in my house and they were now going in my basement. I sprinted out of the room. Then I ran to the other staircase and went up to where my bedroom was. I locked myself in the room and then called the police from my cell phone. They said that they would send someone over right away and that it would be about 10 minutes. I felt better, but I would not be able to feel completely safe until the police were there and the person was out of my house. As I was in my bedroom waiting, after maybe 2 or 3 minutes, I heard the sound of someone walking on the main level of the house. I didn't know if this was the person leaving or what, but the fact that I was hearing them at all worried me. I hoped that they would have just stayed in the basement and the cops could find them there. Then I heard the footsteps reach the bottom of the staircase. Whoever was there then began walking up. Now I was really worried. They slowly walked up the stairs, and then it was like they made a beeline for my bedroom door. They went right up to it, and then tried opening the door, which thankfully had a lock on it. When this happened, I desperately wanted the police to get there now, but they weren't there yet. The person walked away from the door, and then back downstairs. I felt slightly better, but they still didn't leave. I heard them just walking around all over the main floor for several minutes, until at last the police arrived. The cops entered the house, and within seconds I heard multiple voices. After a while, when it was safe, I went downstairs. I saw that there were several officers there. They had found a man inside my house who I did not know. I was told that he was likely trying to rob my place. Luckily, he hadn't done any damage or anything. How he got inside of the house, I do not know. I'm really grateful that I came out of that situation all right. The scariest part to me is that the guy went up to my bedroom when I was in it. This is something that took place back when I was a kid. I believe I was about 10 years old, and at the time I lived with my parents and older sister. We lived in a normal 2-story house in a pretty populated but generally safe neighborhood. So it was a Saturday morning and I was up early. I don't remember why I woke up early, if I had planned to or if I just happened to. It was like 7 a.m. though, and nobody else in the house was awake yet. This was before smartphones and streaming services and all that, so my favorite thing to do was watch TV. I remember that I went downstairs into the living room and turned on the TV. I was watching some kids shows in the living room and just relaxing and enjoying it. The sun had literally just risen as well. So probably 30 minutes into my watching TV, there was a knock on the front door. Being a kid, when I heard it, I got scared. I had no intentions of answering or even looking to see who it was. I stayed on the couch and did not have a view of the front door area from where I was. After maybe 30 seconds to a minute, there was another knock. I had hoped that the person would just go away. After the second knock though, I didn't hear anything for a couple minutes. My curiosity got the better of me, and I got up from the couch and walked over to the front door. I carefully approached and then looked out of the window next to the door to the front step. There was a man standing there. I would have expected whoever it was to be gone by now. I jumped back upon seeing him, and I didn't think that he saw me. I ran out of the room and back towards the living room. At that point, I remember hearing the man attempting to open the front door, which was locked. I had no idea who he was or what he wanted, but it really creeped me out now that he was trying to get inside. I was about to run upstairs and wake everybody up when I thought that maybe I heard the guy walking away. I slowly and quietly went back over to the front of the house, just close enough to look outside. This time, it seemed as though the man was gone because I didn't see him. I went closer and looked out of the window and still didn't see the guy. I realized that he probably walked away after realizing that nobody was going to answer the door and that he couldn't get inside. That made me feel a little better, and I went back into the living room. I really didn't want to wake everybody up, and I figured that they would be getting up soon on their own anyways. So I watched TV in the living room for a while longer. However, I was once again interrupted. This time, I heard another knock on the front door. It was much quieter than before though, but still obvious enough because of how quiet things were. This knock was steady and did not stop. It was a constant soft knocking, which went on for at least 30 seconds straight. I just sat there at first, not knowing what to do. Then I stood up and was trying to decide whether I would run upstairs or go and look to see who was there at the door. I figured that it was probably the same guy, but obviously I didn't know for sure. I ended up just standing up in the living room though and not really moving. Then the knocking finally stopped. I waited another 30 seconds or so and then walked to the front end of the house again. As soon as I got near the front door, I could see the same man was standing there. Then he moved to the side window right next to the door and looked through it right at me. He was clearly seeing me, and the guy was waving me over. When I saw that, I turned around and ran for the stairs. I went upstairs and woke up everyone. When we all went back downstairs though, the man was gone, and he did not return. Nobody knew who he was. After I described him to my parents as best as I could, they still had no idea who it could be. I'm really glad that he didn't get into the house and that I didn't answer the door. I'm not sure what he wanted, because he certainly didn't seem like a door-to-door salesman or anything, and the time with it being just after 7 a.m. is a bit early for that sort of stuff. I'm just glad that I never saw him again. Not too long ago, I was watching YouTube videos with my girlfriend. We were at my apartment just hanging out at night. I have an apartment that's not the greatest. It's on the first floor, and I have a little patio that goes outside from the living room through a sliding glass door. Overall, it's fine though. So like I said, my girlfriend was over and we were just sitting on the couch watching TV. We watch YouTube or whatever all the time. It was probably like 9 p.m. or so. Suddenly, the screen went black for a moment, and then we were seeing some random phone screen. We were both very confused at first, but soon realized that someone must have connected their phone to my TV by mistake. There's a lot of apartment units close by, so you can connect to other people's devices if you really want to. We were seeing the phone screen of whoever this was going through their apps. I figured they would disconnect after realizing they were connected to my TV and not their own, and I expected the screen to return to what we were doing. In the meantime though, I was kind of interested to see what this person was doing, so I didn't bother to get up and turn off the TV or anything. The person then went into the Photos app on their phone. Then they started scrolling through them one at a time. It didn't take me long to see myself among these photos. There were pictures taken straight from my social media pages, such as Facebook and Instagram, just screenshots of them. And then there were pictures of my girlfriend as well. All kinds of pictures of both of us, from both my Facebook and her Facebook as well. And the more this went on, the more confused and creeped out we were. There were probably 10 photos of each of us, and this went on for several minutes. My girlfriend and I were talking to each other in disbelief, wondering who this was and what they were doing. Then, just like that, their phone disconnected. My TV returned to its home screen, and I was left wondering what on earth had just happened. But less than 5 minutes later, as my girlfriend and I were talking to each other trying to figure out what was going on, there was suddenly a knock at my apartment door. I rarely get anybody knocking on the door, so as soon as it happened, we both stopped talking instantly. After a moment, I got up and walked over to see who was there. When I got there, I didn't see anybody. I was even more paranoid now. I figured whoever had connected to the TV had just knocked on my door. We were very confused, and eventually sat back down on the couch and tried to forget about it. We went on the YouTube app again and tried to play a video to take our mind off of things. Meanwhile, my sliding glass door in the room was mostly covered by blinds, but there was about 2 feet at the end that wasn't, as they weren't closed all the way. A few minutes into watching YouTube again, and I saw something out of the corner of my eye. You couldn't really see anything outside with some light being on in the apartment and it being dark out, but I did notice that someone was really close to the window in the opening of the blinds. I looked closer, and the person came closer. Then I realized that there was a man wearing a black ski mask with his face right on the other side of the glass, looking in. My girlfriend noticed him just after me and screamed. She got up and ran out of the room, as I stood up and backed away in shock. Then, very quickly, the masked man turned and ran off into the night. I went over and closed the blinds entirely. Then I made sure that every door and window was covered and locked and all that. I was very paranoid for the rest of the night, but nothing else happened, and since then, there have been no other occurrences like that. It could have just been an elaborate prank, but that was a little bit far to be taking things in my mind, and I also have no idea who would do that kind of a prank to us. My girlfriend and I still get a little bit worried that something like that might happen again when we're at my place at night, and we also have no clue who it was that could have done it. I'm just hoping that they don't return. This happened about 4 years ago now, but it's something that I will never forget. So I lived with a roommate at the time, and we both rented this one house. It was a somewhat small house in a pretty typical residential neighborhood. I don't live there anymore and have since moved out. But one night, I found myself home alone as my roommate went out of town. I was sitting in the living room and watching NCIS on TV. Out of nowhere, I heard my phone vibrating, indicating that I had received a text. I picked it up and looked at it to see that I had a text from an unknown number. The text said, "I also like NCIS." I was very confused at first, not knowing who sent that to me or what they were talking about. Then I realized that possibly someone was spying on me. My TV was in the living room and it faced the front window, so if you looked inside from the outside, you could see what was on TV. I quickly looked behind me to the street out front. At first, I didn't really see anything suspicious, but I soon realized that there was a car parked across on the other side of the street. It was not uncommon for cars to be parked on the street, but I didn't recognize this one at all. I moved closer to the window and looked, but I really couldn't tell if anybody was inside of it or not. So I closed the curtains completely, which covered the windows and would not allow anybody to see in. Meanwhile, I texted the number back, asking who it was. Several minutes later, I got a reply. The new text said, "I'm not allowed to watch anymore?" I once again asked who it was, but they did not reply to me. A while later, I looked out of the window again, and the car was still there. Then I got another text. It said, "I saw you looking at me. What do you want?" I didn't know what to say, and I didn't reply, but I was very worried now. They texted again within another minute and said, "Why don't you come outside?" This one was enough for me to block the number, and I did. A while later, I looked out of the window again. This time, the car was gone. I looked out several more times that night, but did not see the car again. The rest of the time that I lived in that house, nothing strange like that happened again. I also didn't see the car either. I still wonder about it though. Who was that was texting me, and how did they get my number? Also, what would have happened if I had gone outside? Years ago, a store called Blockbuster Video used to be a really popular place. The stores were everywhere, and it was the best place for renting movies and DVDs when they were popular. The stores were always fun to walk inside, and I used to love going there when I was younger. I could probably spend hours inside of them when I was a kid, just looking at all the cool movies and stuff. Well, this story takes place in the early 2000s. I was a young adult at the time and living by myself in an apartment building. I lived pretty close to a Blockbuster Video store, and I would go there all the time. I probably rented movies there at least once a week. One night, I went there like any other. After work, I stopped at another nearby store and then went to Blockbuster. It was quiet inside the store because it was getting kind of late. I was looking for a couple of movies to watch over the weekend. After getting inside the store, I walked around checking out the different categories and new movies that were out on DVD. I slowly made my way around the store, looking at movies and reading the back of the DVD boxes to learn more about the films. I was inside the store for probably a good 20 or 30 minutes. Then I had finally made my selections, picking out, I believe, 2 DVDs. I don't remember which ones though. After I went to the front of the store, I checked out with the cashier and then I left. Now, like right after I stepped out of the store, I remember noticing this guy kind of standing around. He had big glasses and kind of longish hair, and also had dark hair, a goatee, and was fairly tall. He was holding a VHS movie in his hands and stopped me when I was walking by. The man went on to say that he had to buy the movie in his hands and asked me if I wanted it for free. Apparently, he took too long to return it, and with the late fees, he was better off just buying it. He had already seen the movie and didn't want to keep it, but didn't want to give Blockbuster the satisfaction of getting it back. I understood and I said sure I would take it. I was always down for a free movie. I didn't even look at it and took the movie and went to my car. The man then walked away. When I got inside of my vehicle, I looked at the movie for the first time. It was a film called Shanghai Noon, and after seeing the box, it looked interesting and I was happy to get it for free. So I went back home, and over the weekend I watched the movies that I had rented myself. Sometime the next week though, I didn't have any new movies to watch and I remembered Shanghai Noon. I put the VHS in to watch, but it was not what I expected. The movie was not Shanghai Noon. It looked like a home video. Clearly the guy had put a different actual video in the case of the movie. But why would he do that? I was curious, so I kept watching it. It appeared as though the man was filming with his own video camera outside in a parking lot at night. He also appeared to be filming from inside of his car. Then he focused his camera on another car in the parking lot. I quickly recognized it to be my car. Then it showed me getting out of the car and walking inside the Blockbuster store. When I saw that, I was really freaked out. Then the man walked inside the store while still filming about a minute later. As the video went on, it showed him walking around the store. Then I saw myself on camera again. The man had walked into the store and started filming me. I had never noticed this at the time, and he was filming me from a couple of aisles away. I was too busy looking at different movies and stuff. The man walked away from me a couple of times, but kept returning. It was extremely creepy to watch. After a while, the man walked out of the store and the video stopped. I was shocked at what I had seen. I hadn't known any of it was taking place. After that, I did not go back to that Blockbuster for a while. When I did, I luckily didn't see the same man there again. I still wonder about it sometimes. Was it just a random prank, or was the man trying to scare me or stalk me? I really don't know. It's always creepy when somebody's filming you, but today everybody seems to have phones. Back then, you really needed an actual video camera, and for some reason it seemed a lot scarier then. Nothing else strange happened, so I really don't know what exactly that man's deal was. This story occurred during the summer between my sophomore and junior years of high school in 2003. I remember that it was a Friday, and two of my good friends, Amelia and Jessica, came over to my house. My parents went out that night, and my older brother was off at college. The three of us were going to have a sleepover, and we hung out in my bedroom for a while. We wanted to rent a movie because the three of us had already seen everything in my parents' movie collection. There was a Blockbuster Video close within walking distance, so that night we decided to go there. It only took like 15 minutes for the three of us to walk there. We went inside the store and started looking around at all the movies. A few other people were in the store as well, and it took us a while to all agree on something. I remember that we went all around the store and were there for a little while. Finally, after agreeing, we got a movie and went up to check out. That's when we met the guy working that night. I had been to this Blockbuster many times before, but I had never seen this guy, so maybe he was new. The man was not that much older than me, maybe 20 years old, and he had dark brown, spiky hair. He started talking to us, asking us what we were doing that night. Pretty soon, I remember he said that he got off of work soon and asked if he could join our movie night. I remember I figured he was joking, but it sounded kind of creepy, and we all just laughed and said no. He then said he was serious, and it got kind of awkward. He asked us if we wanted to hang out, but none of us wanted to hang out with this guy. Soon though, we were able to take the movie and were done checking out, so we left. We walked back and then got home to my house again. We were still the only ones home, and I made a pizza and we started watching the movie. The three of us were in the family room, which was at the back side of our house. It was basically like a second living room, and I found it more comfortable than the actual living room. So about an hour into the movie, and I remember I heard this noise come from the window behind us. I didn't think too much of it, but I casually turned around to see what it was. That's when I saw the guy from Blockbuster standing there in the backyard. The three of us all noticed him at the same time, and we were really creeped out by him being there. He then proceeded to knock on the window. After a few seconds of confusion, we started telling him to go away. Then Jessica ran out of the room towards the kitchen. The man did not appear to be friendly or happy or angry. He just stood there in a kind of way that was really strange. Then he started walking away to the right and went out of sight of the window. Moments later, Jessica came back into the room, saying that she had just locked the back door. I guess she had seen earlier that it was unlocked, and I'm glad that she did because I hadn't known. Well, just moments later, the man tried opening the back door. We heard it rattling, and thankfully it was locked now. We then went around the house and closed every shade on every window, and I called my parents. They did have cell phones, and they said they were coming home. At that point, we didn't know where the guy was, if he left or if he was still out in the yard. We went to a few windows and carefully looked out of them, but didn't see the guy. For the next few minutes, we kept watch, but didn't see him, and we all figured that he left. My parents got home a while later, and we told them about what happened. I remember that then my dad went outside and looked around. We didn't really have a big yard, but in the back there was a small woods that led to the neighbor's yard. My dad went all around the property, and when he got to the backwoods area, he saw the guy. The man had been hiding in the woods. When my dad saw him, though, he took off running and left. After that, he didn't return. I was nervous for the whole night that the man would come back, but thankfully he didn't. The guy ended up getting fired from the Blockbuster, so he didn't last long there. I'm really glad that he didn't get into the house. I used to work at a Blockbuster video store back in the day. I think that I worked there for about a year and a half, and I was able to work my way up to manager. One night, I was by myself towards the end of the shift. It was a quiet night, and I was closing. At my store, it closed at 9 p.m., and for the last hour or so, we didn't really get any customers. So as far as I was aware, the store was completely empty besides me. When 9 p.m. was approaching, I went around to make sure nobody was there and straighten up a few things. However, when I got towards the back end of the store, I heard a noise. It was the sound of somebody walking, and I realized that I wasn't alone. It was strange because I hadn't heard or seen anyone in the longest time. Whoever was in here must have almost had to be hiding or something. I called out asking who was there, but I got no response. I said that we were closing soon, but there was still nothing. The footsteps were not that far away, and whoever was in here was just a few aisles out of my sight. I walked closer. I looked around but still couldn't see anything. I could hear them walking away like they were trying to move away from me. After walking faster and going around a corner, I finally saw for a split second a woman go around another corner away from me. She was wearing a winter coat and hat and had dark hair. I called out to her asking what she was doing, but she still didn't answer me. The woman had a slightly disheveled appearance. I stopped hearing her move around, so I kept walking up and down each aisle. Eventually, I spotted her. She was hiding behind a DVD display. When I saw her, she got up and ran to another aisle. I was so confused and wondered if something was wrong with the woman or if she was crazy. I asked her if she was all right, but she still didn't answer. It was very weird. She didn't seem to enjoy running around, like she wasn't smiling or laughing as if it was a game. It was like she was very seriously trying to run away from me. I told her again loudly that we were closing and she would have to leave. Of course, she still didn't answer me. As confused as I was, I went back over to the counter where I worked to finish up some things. I didn't know what I was going to do about the woman hiding in the store, but it was like 8:58 at that point. Then, when I was facing the other direction, I heard the doors to the store open. I looked over and just barely saw the woman walking out. I was glad that she was gone. Very quickly, I walked over to the doors and locked them. Then I was able to do a few tasks before leaving. I left the store at probably 9:05 or so. The parking lot was very quiet, and I walked out to my car, which was the only one there. Right when I got inside, I heard footsteps approaching me. I looked and saw the same woman walking in my direction, but she looked a little different now. Her hair had looked sort of messy before, and her hat had been crooked. Now she looked very neat. Her hair was perfectly in place, and her hat was neatly on her head. She also had a more friendly look on her face. I rolled my window down, and the woman said hi to me. She then very politely asked me for a ride. I was so confused, and she mentioned nothing about why she had been running around the store hiding from me. It almost seemed like a different woman, but no, this was definitely the same person. Remembering her past behavior, I told her no, I could not give her a ride. The woman asked if I was sure, still being polite, and I said yes. Then she said okay, and I put my window back up. She started to walk away towards the back of my car. When she did though, she suddenly reached for my door handle really fast and tried opening the back door to the car. It was thankfully locked. After finding out she was locked, she loudly banged on it twice and appeared to kick at my door. I then hit the gas and drove away. I left the woman standing in the parking lot looking at me as I drove off. I have no idea why she did the things that she did. My best guess is drugs. She acted so different and normal when she was talking to me though. I luckily never saw her again in my time working at Blockbuster. This happened one sunny Saturday morning in 1993. I'm a female and was 13 years old at the time. I remember that my mom had to do some shopping and I went with her. It was just the two of us and we went to this strip mall that was fairly close to where we lived. The strip mall had several different stores, as well as restaurants in it. We went to a store where my mom was shopping, and I found it pretty boring. There was also a Blockbuster store that was right next door, which was always interesting. So I told my mom that I was going to go next door to Blockbuster and look around. My mom said it was fine, and when she was done, she would come and let me know. So I left the store and then walked into the Blockbuster. When I got inside, I started to walk around and look at the movies. Within being inside of the store for maybe 5 minutes, I remember noticing this man kind of staring at me. He was standing at the end of the aisle, and I saw him out of the corner of my eye. I couldn't tell at first, so I looked over. The guy was just kind of staring at me. I didn't know him or anything. I stayed there for about a minute or so, and so did the man. Him just standing there though and seemingly looking at me was getting uncomfortable, so I walked away. I went to another aisle to look at stuff. Before long though, I noticed the man slowly walk into that aisle as well. After that, I started to walk around the store. Wherever I went, it didn't take long before the man would show up. I was not sure where he had come from or what, but I decided to leave the Blockbuster and go back to the store that my mom was in. I walked out and then went to the store next door and went inside. I found my mom and I did not tell her about the creepy guy. For the next few minutes, I just shopped with her. Then I noticed the man was now inside of this store. He was not following me around, but was kind of standing at the complete opposite other side. He was looking in my direction though. By this point, I was very weirded out by his behavior. I didn't know if he was really trying to follow me around, but it sure seemed like it. I tried to just ignore it though. I didn't really feel in danger now that I was with my mom again. Still, I was very surprised that the man went in this store as well. We didn't shop there for much longer in that store. Soon my mom checked out and then we left. We got into our car in the strip mall parking lot, which was not that large. It was basically just 2 long rows of parking spaces. After getting in the car, I noticed the man walking out to another car that was parked a ways down. I was sure to realize which car he entered. We started to leave, and then I noticed the man's car start to leave as well after us. This shocked me. After pulling out of the lot and the man doing the same thing, I told my mom about it. She noticed the car, and when she heard the guy had been following me around Blockbuster, she stopped and then made a U-turn. The guy behind us did as well. My mom then went back into the parking lot of the strip mall and stopped the car. At first, the man did the same thing. My mom then got out of the car. She was angry and I guess wanted to confront the guy. However, after my mom got out, the guy backed up his car and then turned it around. He quickly drove away again, leaving the strip mall and going out of sight. After that, we were able to go home. I'm glad that I told my mom about the guy and he stopped following us. I'm not sure what would have happened if not. I used to work at a Blockbuster Video back in the day. This is when they were really popular and all over the place. I was 17 at the time, and the Blockbuster by my parents' house was one of my first jobs. My time working there was mostly good. I enjoyed Blockbuster and my coworkers because I became friends with a number of them. After I had been working there for a while, I remember that we got a new coworker though. He always seemed a little bit strange and mysterious. I remember that he was around my age, maybe slightly older. His name was actually Justin, but my coworkers always referred to him as Timberlake. It was because of his name, but also because he slightly resembled Justin Timberlake. But that was really just because the guy's hair was dyed blonde, and at the time, Justin Timberlake's also was. But this Justin guy at work was known for being kind of odd like I mentioned. Personally, in my experiences working with him, he just seemed kind of unfriendly. I never really talked to him or even worked with him all that much. However, one night I worked with him until a little bit later at night. We didn't really talk to each other much from what I could remember, and we both got off of work at around the same time that night. I recall that I drove home back to my parents' house, which was a little over 5 minutes away. It was nighttime and the roads were very quiet. I didn't have to go on any roads that were that busy either, so I noticed that Justin appeared to be driving right behind me the entire way. He was sort of a far ways back though, but every time I would turn, a short time later, I would see his car turning around the corner. As I got closer to my house, I was wondering why he was driving behind me. I didn't think that he lived in my neighborhood, because I knew he hadn't gone to my school. Soon, I came to my street, and he turned onto it after me. When I reached my house though, I pulled into my driveway, and he did not. He kept driving down the street. I went inside and then looked out of the window. A short time later, I saw Justin driving back down and then he went out of sight. I didn't really know why he did this. It was very strange, but for the most part, I just forgot about it. It was just a few days later when something really crazy happened. It was late at night and I was the only one who was still up. My parents had gone to bed and I was in my room. It was probably about midnight. I just remember that out of nowhere, I heard the back door to the house suddenly fly open. I had a bad feeling about it immediately and was afraid that somebody was breaking in. I heard someone walk into the house, but I told myself that it had to be one of my parents. Maybe they had gone outside without me knowing, because obviously we locked all the doors every night, and I just couldn't imagine somebody would break in. After hearing the person walking around near the back end of the house for a short time, I kept telling myself that it was my dad, but I just had to see for myself. So I left my bedroom and started walking down the hallway and then down the stairs. Soon I reached the main level of the house. When I got there, every light was off. I looked around and then saw him. Justin from work at Blockbuster was standing there inside of our house. I really couldn't believe it. He looked surprised to see me, but I will tell you, I was way more surprised to see him. As soon as he saw me though, he turned around and took off. He ran to the back of the house and then left out the back door. I walked over there, still in shock. The back door appeared to have been pried open with maybe a crowbar, but it had been locked. I then woke my parents and called the police. Justin was long gone, but I knew exactly who he was. He was quickly found and luckily hadn't stolen anything. I later found out that Justin had somehow heard that my parents were wealthy, I guess from a coworker. Yes, my parents did have some money, and our house was nice, but we weren't filthy rich or anything. I mean, I still worked at Blockbuster to get my own money, but apparently Justin thought that he could rob our house. That also explained why he followed me home, to get my address. I will never forget that crazy experience. A couple of years ago, I had to go to the airport one night to pick up my sister. She was flying in from Detroit, and the flight was supposed to land fairly late. I think it was like 10 or 11 p.m. or something like that. However, her flight ended up being a little bit late. I arrived at the airport somewhat early, but my sister wasn't back yet. I went and parked the car in a parking lot and then went inside of the airport. When I got inside, I found the time that my sister's flight was now supposed to land, and I had about 20 more minutes to wait. So I went over and sat down. By now, the airport was very quiet. There were just a few people walking by here and there. As I sat down and waited, I remember that at one point I saw this woman randomly walking up to me. When she approached me, she asked me how to get to the city from the airport. Now, the city was like 5 minutes away, so I told her, and it was pretty easy. She walked away after that in another direction. But then the woman stopped, sort of near another sitting area, but did not sit down. I wasn't really watching her, and I mostly went on my phone. A while later, though, I looked up to see the woman just staring at me. She was standing in about the same spot. Now, she was a long distance away, but there was still no mistaking that she was looking in my direction. I found it really odd. I looked away, though, and focused my attention back on my phone. The woman continued to stare at me, though, because the next time that I looked up, she was still doing it. I didn't know why. I had thought that she had to get to the city. After all, she had asked me for directions, but now it seemed as though she just wanted to stare at me creepily. I just ignored it for the most part, though. Soon my sister's flight had landed. I got up and walked over to go wait where the bags would come out. I walked a little ways away and located it. Then I stood around for a while and waited for my sister. A short time later, she came out and got her bag, and then we started to leave. As I was walking away, I saw the woman in the airport again, still staring at me. I thought it was weird, but I just ignored it. I looked away and left the airport with my sister. We walked out of the airport and went towards the parking lot. I remember that when we got to the parking lot, I looked back and noticed that the woman who had been staring at me was now in the parking lot as well. She was walking behind us a good distance back. I was very confused now. Who was this woman? Why did she keep staring at me? And what exactly was she doing? She seemed to be walking sort of fast, and as we were walking to the car, I told my sister about the woman. The parking lot was very large, so it was kind of a long walk. As we continued, my curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to just ask the woman. I stopped and turned around to face her. Then I started to take a couple of steps towards her. As soon as I did, though, the woman stopped suddenly. Then she turned around and sprinted away in the opposite direction into the end of the parking lot. It was so weird. I stood there watching until she went out of sight, and I had no idea what was going on. But then I just continued with my sister towards the car. We eventually got there, loaded my sister's bags in the back, and then got inside. As I started to drive away though, I was still in the parking lot, and I noticed this car come driving sort of fast into the lot. It went in front of me, and I caught a look at the driver. It was the same woman. I could not believe it. She was driving a pickup truck, and drove around my car sort of recklessly. She ended up driving around and going behind it, and I left the parking lot hoping that she would keep driving the other way. But this woman screeched her tires and quickly turned around. As I left the parking lot, she started to follow me. I drove down the road, leaving the airport with the woman still behind me. Soon I turned, and the woman turned as well. She drove behind my car down the next quiet road for some time. We were about the only 2 cars out because it was very late at night. When I turned onto the next road, the woman made the turn very wide. She ended up going off the road and sliding a bit before hitting a tree in the grass and crashing. The crash really was not that bad, but I pulled over and stopped to call the police. After crashing, the woman got out of her truck and then went into the woods nearby. I was very confused. The police arrived at the scene fairly quick, and I told them what happened. They searched the woods and pretty quickly located the woman. We were able to go home after that. I later found out that the woman was high on drugs. She obviously should not have been behind the wheel of a vehicle, and that explained her reckless driving. That also explained why she acted so strange. Something really weird happened to me a couple of years ago. It all started for me one day when I had a flight. I travel a lot for business, so I'm very much used to flying and being in airports. One day I had a flight from Atlanta to Baltimore. I boarded and got on the plane to my seat, which was a window seat sort of towards the front. A short time after I got to my seat, a guy came up and sat next to me. He looked pretty average for the most part, and nothing about him stood out. I gave a sort of hi when he sat down, and he did the same. Then he just sat there, and neither of us said anything to each other. The flight was really not that long. It was like an hour and a half or so. The man didn't say anything the whole time. He just sort of sat there, not that I was watching him or really paying attention. When the flight landed, we all got off and went into the airport at Baltimore. I had a ride coming to get me, but it got delayed, so I had a little bit of time at the airport. I went into a coffee shop, got inside of it, got a drink, and then sat down with my laptop. After being there for nearly 30 minutes, I looked up from my laptop randomly to see the guy who had been sitting next to me on my flight. He was sitting on the other side of the coffee shop at a table. I figured that it was a coincidence and thought nothing of it really. A while later, my ride got there and I got up and left. The next day, I was still in Baltimore, and I was at a restaurant in the morning getting breakfast with a coworker. The restaurant was in the city, and we were sitting sort of in the back. There were a decent amount of other people there, but I remembered that I randomly looked up towards the front and saw the same guy. It was the man who I had seen on my flight and in the coffee shop. Plus, this man was not at the restaurant with anyone. He seemed to be by himself, and he was facing me. It seemed pretty suspicious, but it also could have just been a coincidence, but it would have been a pretty crazy one at that. I'm not a shy person or anything, so I decided to go talk to him. I was really curious as to why I kept seeing him. I got up from the table and walked right over to him. The man looked surprised to see me at first. I told the man how he sat next to me on the flight, and he was at the coffee shop with me and now here. At first, the man actually denied it, but I knew it was him. After telling him that I knew it was him, and I wasn't even talking angry or anything, I asked him sort of jokingly why he kept following me around. I remember the man paused, and then he looked at me and said, "Because I like to stalk people." Obviously at first I thought he was joking, but the way that he said it was very serious. The man then said that he had been watching me since the flight everywhere I went. I thought that it was really weird what he was saying, and I didn't know how to respond. Finally, I said, "Okay, well, you can stop following me around now." The man did not say anything. His behavior was very strange to say the least. I just walked back over to my coworker and then told him all about what happened. None of us knew what to make of this strange man. Before leaving, we looked over, and the guy was still there. When we walked past him to leave, I stopped and said to him, "I'm leaving now, so don't follow me." I was careful to look behind me after getting onto the sidewalk outside of the restaurant. I made sure the guy wasn't following me, and he didn't seem to. Later on in the day though, we had work stuff to do, and I was busy. I pretty much forgot about the guy who had been following me, and I also didn't see him. That night, I got back to my hotel room and went to bed at about 10 p.m. However, before I fell asleep, I heard a noise. I was just lying down in the bed and all the lights were off. The only sound to that point was the very quiet noise of the TV, which the volume was barely above mute. I then heard a knock from my hotel door. I really didn't know why anybody would be knocking on my door so late. Then I heard a voice. I couldn't make it out at first, because whoever it was not talking very loud. I got up from my bed and walked a little closer. That's when I heard it clearly. It was a man's voice, the same man who had been following me around. He was saying my name and then telling me to open the door. The way he said it was really creepy. It was almost like he was playing a game. I wasn't sure what to do at first. I looked through the peephole, and sure enough, the same guy was there. Then I decided to call the front desk and report him. As the guy was still in the hallway outside my door, I called and let the hotel know what was going on. Then I did my best to ignore the man. I couldn't sleep, and every so often he would knock on the door again. I just sat on the bed and hoped that the guy wouldn't do anything crazy. A while later, I heard some other voices in the hallway. Soon the knocking stopped and the man was gone. After that, I was able to go to bed. The next morning, I found out that the police got involved. The man was knocking on my door and hotel staff asked him to leave. He did leave, only to come back about an hour later. At that point, the hotel called police on him. That time, the cops got the guy to leave. I didn't see the man for the rest of my trip, and thankfully, I haven't seen him since. I don't know why that guy followed me. It seems really bizarre to do that, and maybe something was wrong with him. I just hope that I never see him again. Last year, I had to pick up a friend from the airport. I didn't really mind it too much because I don't live that far away. It's maybe a 15-minute drive. The most annoying part really was that the flight landed at 6 a.m., so I had to get up pretty early. When I drove to the airport, things already seemed pretty busy there. The airport usually is. I went on one of those long roads where you pick up or drop off people. Cars pull over really fast and then leave. It can be kind of hectic sometimes, and it certainly was on this day. So I found a spot by where my friend said she was coming out. There was a car a little ways in front of me, and right after I pulled over, a car came and pulled up behind me pretty close. I texted my friend that I was there, and just moments later, I saw her come out of the doors. She came up to my car and put her bags in the back. Then she got inside the passenger's door. Right as I was about to put the car into drive, this car came up really fast and then turned right in front of my car. It parked extremely crooked, halfway in front of my vehicle and halfway to the side of it. It was the most careless parking job I've ever seen. There was another car parked a little ways in front of me, so I guess they wanted to squeeze in between us. The car stopped and someone got out of the passenger's door and headed towards the airport. The driver stayed in. I was a little bit annoyed at the borderline reckless move. However, I figured it must be a quick drop-off and they would be on their way. Except, the person did not leave. Meanwhile, the car behind me wasn't leaving either. I was completely boxed in. I sat there just waiting for over a minute. I didn't know what the person in the car in front of me was doing. There was a guy in the driver's seat and he appeared to just be sitting there. I honked at him so I could get out. That's when I saw the man who was behind the wheel look over at me and give me the bird. This made me real angry and I honked again loudly. However, he did not leave. He just sat there. Just then though, the car behind me finally started to leave. After it did, I backed up and turned to go around the man who was parked crooked. However, just after I passed his car, I saw he suddenly backed up and then started to go forward. He was now driving behind me. This enraged me even more. It meant he literally could have left whenever, but he was carelessly blocking me in for no reason. As I drove out of the airport, the car followed. He got really close to my back bumper, and I was a little worried that he might try something. That's when my friend had a good idea. She said that if the guy followed us out of the airport to go to a police station. I didn't know where one was, so she looked one up on her phone. As we left the airport and went on another road, the guy behind me did as well. He was still following very close, and I had a bad feeling about it. We got the directions to the police station and started following them. Over the next several minutes of driving, there were several times where I was sure the guy was going to bump my car with his. Thankfully, he didn't though, but he got very close. Eventually, we made it to the police station and turned into it. The man did not. However, he slowed down significantly and yelled something out of his window, but I couldn't hear it. Then he screeched away, squealing his tires in the process. We reported him to the police, but I'm not sure if anything could really be done. Then we drove back. I dropped my friend off and was able to get back to my place without a problem. Thankfully, nothing like that has happened since, but each time I go to the airport, I think about that crazy experience. This happened several years ago. For some background, I'm a female, and I was flying back home one time. I remember that I had visited a friend who lived in another state. I got to the airport and was waiting for my flight to board. When I arrived, it was about an hour before boarding time, so I had some time. I sat down in the area where my flight was waiting. After a little while of sitting down, I decided to get up and get something to drink. I found one of the airport stores and then went inside of it. When I was there, this man walked up to me. He had long dark hair, a slight beard, and was on the larger side. He came up to me and said hi. I didn't know who the guy was, but I said hi back to him. That's when he said I was good friends with his sister. I had never seen this guy before, and I asked him who his sister was. He paused for a moment and then said Molly, but I didn't know anyone named Molly, and I told him that. The guy must have me confused with somebody else. He said he was sure that he knew me. From that point on, the guy wouldn't leave me alone. He started asking me about where I was headed and when my flight was. I told him because I didn't see the harm in it, and I was polite. He asked me if I wanted to get some food at the restaurant with him before my flight, and I said no thanks. After I got the water that I wanted at the shop, I went and checked out. The guy was basically following me the whole ways. I remember I asked him where he was going, and he said his flight was for California, I think. Then I told him to have a nice flight and goodbye. I then started to walk back over to the boarding area. The guy did say bye to me, and I made it back without him following me or anything. I sat back down and continued to wait for my flight. I remember a while later, right before my flight was about to board, I saw the guy again. He came up and walked over towards me. I was confused as to why he was there. Then he told me that he was going on my flight. I really couldn't believe it. In fact, I didn't believe him. I was so confused that I didn't say anything at all. He went on to say that his flight got canceled, and so he bought a ticket on my flight. The only thing I said was why. He said because he wanted to. I had no idea who this guy was or why he thought he could just do whatever I did. He sat down next to me, but I got up. I told him that I was sorry, but I was not interested in hanging out with him or anything. The guy didn't say anything. I went and stood closer to the counter waiting to board the plane. Eventually, we boarded. Thankfully, I did not have a seat next to the guy. I was really worried about that. He was sitting way in the back, and I was a lot closer to the front. The flight took off, and we flew back to my hometown. I had actually forgot about the guy during the flight, because I watched a movie and I also fell asleep briefly. After getting off the plane and walking through the airport again though, he caught up with me. He tapped me on the shoulder, and when I turned around and saw him, I remembered, giving me a bad feeling. The guy then asked me if he could stay at my place because he didn't have a hotel or anything yet. I told him no. As we walked through the airport, the guy followed me. I had a friend coming to pick me up, and I called to let her know that I was there. When the guy continued to follow me as I approached the doors, I told him to stop following me or I would report him. He didn't say anything. When I left the airport though, he was still there. At that point, I just took off running. I located my friend's car and sprinted to it and got inside. I told her to quickly drive away. I looked back and saw the man actually running in our direction. My friend didn't know what was going on obviously, but when she saw the guy running towards us in the mirror, she left. We were able to safely get away before he reached us, and I told my friend the whole story. Since then, I haven't seen the man. Looking back, that was just a really crazy situation. I have no idea why that guy seemed so obsessed with me. I had truly never seen him before that day. The fact that he actually bought a ticket on my flight blows my mind. I'm glad that I haven't seen him since then. A few years ago, I had a flight back home. I was flying from Dallas to Chicago, and the flight back was pretty nice. The story really begins after we landed. My flight landed sort of late, at about midnight or so. Afterwards, I walked through the airport and then waited for my ride, which didn't take too long. I got picked up at the airport by my friend, and after driving me back, she dropped me off at my apartment. It wasn't too long of a drive because I lived fairly close. After getting back, I went inside. I was tired from the long day of travel, and it was really late, so I pretty much just got ready for bed at that point. Afterwards, I looked on my phone before getting in bed, and I saw that I had a missed call. I didn't recognize the number and was wondering why somebody would call me so late. Just as I was looking at it, they called again. I was curious, so I decided to answer it. I said hello, and on the other end at first, I just heard breathing. Then, I heard a woman speak. She said that she was on my flight from Dallas to Chicago, and now she was outside of my apartment. I didn't know if I should take this serious or not, but I was very confused to say the least. I asked her who she was, because I did not recognize the voice. The woman did not tell me. She just said that she wanted me to let her inside, or she would break in. Then she hung up. This really creeped me out. I went over to my front door and looked out of it, but didn't see anybody. I had no clue if this was some kind of a prank or what. I looked out into the hallway both directions, but still saw nothing. For a while, I thought that the woman was going to call me again. I was pretty nervous, and I wasn't tired anymore. I stayed up for several hours, and nothing happened. At that point, I decided to just block the number. After that, I was able to go to sleep. The next morning, I got up, and things were fine. Nobody had broken in or anything. However, when I left my apartment, I saw that there was a sticky note on my door. I looked at it, and it was simply a frowning face. I thought that had to be left by whoever that woman was. I was very creeped out. However, nothing more happened after that. I didn't get any more strange calls or people at my door. I don't live in that apartment anymore either. That remains a sort of mystery to me of who did that and why. I'm hoping that it was just a prank, but I really don't know. One day, a couple of years ago, when I was 25 years old, I had a little time to kill before picking up my kids from school. It was a gorgeous day, so I decided to spend some time cruising some back roads in my small rural hometown listening to music. I passed this guy with his thumb out trying to catch a ride. He looked to be in either his late 30s or early 40s, and he was carrying a fishing pole and a backpack. Being a female by myself, I decided to just keep driving. I passed the man and kept going, but as I drove, I had this internal dialogue of guilt about my decision not to pick up the guy. I figured if I was in his shoes, I would want to be picked up. That, mixed with my new self-improvement goal of doing things out of my comfort zone, led me to the conclusion that if he was still there when I came back around, I would pick him up. Sure enough, about 10 minutes later, he was still there. I was feeling a little nervous pulling over to pick him up, but I had a safety plan formed in case anything went wrong. As soon as he got in, I realized I had probably made a horrible mistake. Firstly, because he seemed like he was on some sort of a drug and smelled awful, and secondly, because this dude was looking at me in ways that make women uncomfortable. I didn't realize exactly how rattled I was with my decision until he asked me for a smoke, and my hands were shaking so bad when I was grabbing one from my pack. Driving made it easier to hide my nerves, but I was internally freaking out and had gone through many of the what-if scenarios in my head already. The guy's name was Wayne, and he lived about 5 minutes from where I picked him up, so thankfully the drive didn't last that long. Meanwhile, he was telling me about how he lost his license due to DUIs, and how he was living in this house with an old man. He was also trying to talk me into hanging out at his house with him and coming over to drink with him the next day. When I finally got him to his destination, it was a little shack thing that was surrounded by all these junk cars and other trash. He got out and still tried to get me to come inside with him. I told him no, and I left. I was feeling really relieved once I was gone, and a little proud that I faced a fear of mine. Fast forward to a month later when I found out that somebody got murdered down that same road where I dropped Wayne off at. I saw Wayne's picture on Facebook saying that he was arrested for stabbing someone to death at the very house I dropped him off at. Graphic information about how he stabbed him in the lungs and the victim bled out in that little shack. Also, it turns out that the old man Wayne was saying he lived with didn't exist, and he was the only person living there. Very creepy stuff, and I'm sure I'll never pick up another hitchhiker in my life. Years ago, right after I graduated from high school, I did a lot of couch surfing and was staying with my friend Mike for a while. His family lived about 30 miles north of the town I worked in, and his mother usually brought me down to town with her in the morning when she went to work. Mike and I would often stay late in town to hang out with friends, so we'd have to bum rides or hitchhike back if we wanted to sleep at the house. So one Friday, he and I stuck around town for too long and missed our ride back with his mom. We were young and brave tough guys, so we didn't think too much of hitchhiking back. We hung around the interstate exit with our thumbs out and scored a ride with two really cool Jamaican dudes. They drove us most of the way back up the highway and dropped us off at a town about 5 miles from where we were headed. Everything was going well, and we were happy we had made such great time getting this far. We walked up through the town, stopped for drinks, and headed out the north end to start hitchhiking again. We got picked up pretty quickly by a guy in his 40s who was very friendly. He told us he was headed right past the road we were headed for, and we couldn't believe our luck. I jumped in the front and Mike got in the back seat. As we came up on the turn near our drop-off point, the man suddenly put his hand on my leg. I quickly pushed his hand off my leg and basically stared him down. It was starting to get dark, but I told the man to let us off here on the road and we would walk the rest of the way. I just didn't want to be in the car with this guy anymore. The guy instead proceeded to reply, "Just relax, it's all cool, I'll drive you to where you're headed," and then he put his hand back on my leg. I was really angry at this guy, and I told him to pull over immediately as I reached for my pocket knife. Mike, from the back seat, grabbed the guy and put him in a headlock and started choking him out, telling him to pull over. The man let go of my leg and started yanking on Mike's arm, trying to get free. Both hands were off the wheel and the car was swerving all over the road. We were still going at least 40 miles per hour, and I was terrified we were going to crash. We were headed straight for this big tree on the side of the road, and the driver must have seen it because he slammed on the brakes at the last second. The car was moving slow enough to jump out, so I yelled "jump" to Mike, and then shoved the door open and we dove out onto the pavement. The driver realized I was getting away, and he hit the gas, making the door spring back and almost catch my feet. The back wheel missed me by less than a foot and the guy sped away, already back up to 40 miles an hour. Mike was rolling in the middle of the road, and I realized we had both made it out of the car. I grabbed Mike and we dragged ourselves off the road into the trees. The car was now doing a U-turn in the middle of the road about 100 yards away to come back towards us. We quickly flattened ourselves in mud and dirt as we hid as low as we could make ourselves. Both of us were banged up and bleeding from the pavement. The psycho drove past real slow to try to spot us, and he even turned around and came back again. Every time he got out of sight, we would jump up and run through the woods headed towards Mike's parents' house, which was still several miles away. Every time we heard a car coming, we would drop and hide. The car must have gone up and down the road a dozen times or more looking for us. It took nearly 2 more hours to make it the next couple of miles in the woods, in the dark. We finally got to the house, dirty, bloody, exhausted, and Mike's parents went nuts when they saw us. Mike's dad is a scary guy. He's huge, about 6'6", very strong, and has a bit of a temper as well. So naturally, instead of calling the police, he marched us down the highway and made us stand in the road as bait for the driver to come back while he hid in the woods. We stood there for another hour or so, but the guy didn't come back, which I have mixed feelings about. Mike's dad probably would have beaten the guy to death if he'd caught him, which is that guy's problem, but I was afraid the guy had a gun or something. After all, how was he planning on kidnapping 2 guys at the same time? Mike's mom made us report it to the police the next morning, but I never heard if they caught the guy. This experience is exactly why I don't hitchhike anymore, or pick up hitchhikers. When I was a teenager growing up in Southern California, it was not uncommon to hitchhike with friends. This was way before Uber or Lyft, and my friends and I actually always came out with cool stories from our experiences, as nothing bad had happened to me yet. We had some basic rules for hitchhiking being young girls, and the main ones was to never get into a van and to never get into a vehicle with more than 2 guys in it. I ended up in a horrible situation because I broke those rules. Southern California at the time had a ton of clubs you could get into while being under 18 years old, and bartenders could tell who was of drinking age by a band on your arm. It was not hard back then for my friends and I to slip off the under 18 bands and slip a drinking age one on. This was the 90s, so it wasn't really that strict. We were at one of these clubs, and my friends had decided that it was time to leave, but I had told my grandparents who I was staying with that I was spending the night at a friend's house. I wasn't ready to go, and I let my friends leave without me. When I finally decided to leave, I admit I had a little too much to drink, and I probably was visibly intoxicated. We had pagers back in those days, so I had paged my friend who I was staying with that night that I was headed over to her place now. I started to walk the 3 or 4 miles to the apartment complex when a vehicle pulled up, asking if I needed a ride. The guy was kinda cute, and I was very drunk, so I ignored the safety rules. It was a van full of college-aged guys, and it went against everything I knew, but I did it anyway. As soon as the van door closed, I knew I had made a huge mistake. The cute guy summoned me to sit on his lap in the passenger seat, to which I obliged. Then he started feeling me and the entire vibe changed. I knew I was in trouble. I played along and started talking about an after party with all my hot friends, some that were models, in hopes of putting their focus on something else. The driver summoned me to sit on his lap, to which I obliged again, knowing the longer I played along with them, the better. He would take his hands off the wheel, and then I would grab the steering wheel, and he would grab me inappropriately. I felt that these 4 guys in the van were looking for an area to take me, and I knew what would happen if they found one. I then went into an elaborate story of how these after parties usually went. I told the guys of how drugs and alcohol were abundant, and how they were expecting me to bring cute guys to the party. I played these guys to the best of my ability because I knew that my well-being counted on it. Thankfully it worked, and they drove me to my friend's apartment complex since I told them that's where the party was. The apartment complex had a few other complexes around it with a park in the center. I had these guys pull up and park across the park, which was approximately 100 yards away from where I was actually going. I played out how much fun we were all going to have. As soon as the van door opened, I booked it and ran as fast as I could across the park, and could hear the guys yelling and coming after me. I was too afraid to look back, and I just kept running. I ran to the complex next to where I was actually going, where my friends had lived. I found a stairwell that had a few bikes chained to it, and I slid under the staircase. I could hear the guys yelling for me and getting close. I was afraid that my breathing was loud, and I was convinced that they might even hear my heart beating. It was so loud in my ears. I tucked up into the fetal position and closed my eyes so tight I thought I couldn't see them. I guess I thought if I couldn't see them, they couldn't see me. I tried my hardest to control my breathing and my heartbeat. I stayed under that staircase for a while, and they never found me, but not because of a lack of trying to find me. I was too scared to move. I felt like they were waiting and watching, so I stayed frozen. I finally had the courage to move after a while, and I carefully made my way to my friend's place where I was staying. I made it, and I was safe. I never hitched a ride from a stranger again. I know how lucky I was, and I know very well what could have happened, and I will be forever grateful that I did not become a statistic that night. I learned a very valuable lesson that night. A few months ago, one of my girlfriends had too much to drink at a nightclub and ended up getting alcohol poisoning. It was pretty scary when the paramedics showed up and I saw her completely unconscious. I was very panicked, but I couldn't go with her in the ambulance, unfortunately. I had no ride, but I wanted to go to the hospital and be there for her. My phone was dead since I had been using it earlier in the night to take some pictures, and I had forgotten to charge it, so it had died at around midnight. I tried asking people in the club if I could borrow their phones so I could book an Uber, but nobody would let me. I had no way to contact my friend or anyone else to figure out which hospital she had been taken to. The whole situation was just overwhelming. I didn't know what to do. Around 2 a.m., I finally ran to the nearest gas station, hoping to use their landline to get in touch with someone. When I got there, I used the phone to confirm which hospital my girlfriend had been taken to. I was relieved to get the information, but now I had another problem. I had no way to get there. I didn't have a phone to call an Uber, and I didn't have enough cash for a taxi. I was pacing around the parking lot, feeling lost, when a guy who had been hanging around the station walked up to me. He asked if I was okay, and I told him the situation. I was desperate, and I asked if he could give me a ride to the hospital. I normally wouldn't even consider asking a stranger for a ride, but I needed to get there. He said he was on his way home, and it wasn't out of his way, so he agreed to drive me. We got into his car, and for the next 15 minutes we made small talk. He seemed like an average guy, with nothing unusual about him. He dropped me off at the hospital. I thanked him, and we exchanged numbers, in case it wasn't the right hospital, and then I could call him. I didn't think much about the phone number swap, and it seemed like a precautionary step. At that point, I was just relieved to have made it to the hospital and to know that my friend was getting care. Not even an hour later, though, as my phone was charging in the hospital, I started getting texts from the guy. At first, they seemed innocent, just friendly messages checking to see if I was okay, but then it quickly turned creepy. He started asking for explicit photos of me. I was shocked when I realized he had taken my kindness of giving him my phone number and turned it to something completely uncomfortable. I blocked his number immediately and felt sick that someone would do this. I then later got a text from a random number, which must have been the same guy using another phone. In not so kind words, he told me to send him explicit content or he would kill me. This was enough for me to involve the police, and I had the guy's number, so they were able to track him down. I have no idea what they actually were able to do. Probably not much besides giving him a warning. I'm not really sure though. I never found out. I couldn't believe what happened though. Here I was thinking he was just a good Samaritan helping me out in a time of need, and it turned out he had other intentions. I'm grateful that I made it to the hospital safely, and that man didn't try anything while I was in the car with him. Guys like him are the exact reason I don't ever hitchhike, other than that emergency situation. One evening, I was coming home from work and I stopped at a pharmacy to pick something up. As I was walking out of the building, some guy came up to me saying he needed a ride somewhere. Now, normally I would have just brushed him off, but for some reason I was feeling exceptionally generous that day. The guy looked like he was down on his luck, in some trouble, and just needed a quick hand to get back on his feet. After all, I would want someone to do the same for me. Plus, the area we were in was considered pretty safe, so I let him in my car. The first red flag was the guy would not stop talking. He had this nervous, anxious look in his eye, like something clearly was on his mind. I myself am not much of a talker, so his rapid speaking became glaringly obvious as the car started moving. The second red flag was that the guy was trying way too hard to get my trust. He talked about how he goes to church every Sunday and he handed me a card for the church. He also demanded that we exchange numbers and said that I was free to call him the next day. But the final red flag came a bit later. The guy's story is that he needed a ride to his car, which had broken down on a street that he told me. As I was driving, I realized this was a little weird. Why do you need a ride to a broken down car? But as we kept moving, he said his car was actually on a different street and then another street. He changed the location of where his car was 3 times, saying he forgot where it was. At this point, my heart sank and I started to panic. I had to let this guy out of my car as fast as possible. It was already pretty late, and we were surrounded by dark neighborhoods. I didn't know if the guy had a knife or a weapon on him, and I realized that his directions had been guiding me closer and closer to a much sketchier part of town. Next, the guy pulled out his phone and muttered something inaudible to whoever was on the other line. Then he said to me in a very loud and demanding tone, "We gotta pull over behind this Walmart, that's where the car is." His directions changed multiple times before leading me to the back of a Walmart in the middle of the night. I was very sketched out about the whole thing, but luckily I saw my chance. We were approaching Walmart from the side, so the entrance to the back and the front are really close to each other. We went up to the back entrance and he screamed, "Right here, man, right here," but I kept going a little bit forward to the front entrance. I had to wait a few seconds for some cars to pass, and my heart was pounding as I was half expecting him to pull out a knife or a gun. The cars passed, and I drove up to the brightly lit Walmart front entrance with plenty of people walking about. The guy just opened the door and got out of the car without another word. I certainly feel like he was trying to set me up for a carjacking, or maybe a robbery. Not too long ago, I had something really strange happen. It was just a few weeks back, and I came home from work one day just like any other. I live by myself in an apartment, and I've lived here for about 2 years. It's a decently nice place. Probably 10 or 20 minutes after arriving back from work, at about 4 in the afternoon, there was a knock on my front door. I went over and opened it up to see a woman standing there who I did not recognize. She said that she had witnessed somebody seemingly trying to break into my car just minutes prior. I was told by her that she saw me leaving my car, and a man then walked by several minutes later and tried the doors and windows. She said she just wanted to let me know. Of course, I was very concerned about it. I wanted to know who and why someone would try to break into my vehicle, although I didn't really have much of anything worth stealing in the car. So I left my apartment, and then the woman walked out with me to my car. I always parked in the large parking lot right outside of the apartment building in usually the same space. Lots of other cars were in the parking lot as well. When we got to my car, thankfully it looked fine. None of the windows were smashed or anything, and the doors were all closed and locked. So it looked like the man didn't get in. And after seeing this and looking around, I didn't see the guy that the lady had described. So I told her thanks, and then I went back into the apartment building. That was weird enough, but things got weirder. The next morning, when I was leaving for work like usual, I noticed one other car running a little ways away in the parking lot. The car was kind of behind me and up against the end of the parking lot. I didn't think anything of it. However, when I was driving away and I went past it, for whatever reason I looked over. I'm not really sure why I did, but I noticed that the same woman appeared to be behind the wheel who had talked to me. I assumed that she just lived in the complex. Now, I had never seen her before prior to when she showed up at my door, but the building was fairly large and I certainly didn't know everybody inside of it. I didn't see her for the rest of that day. The next day though, when I got home from work, I parked in the same space that I usually do. Just seconds after parking, a car entered the lot and parked against the back of the lot behind me a ways. I looked over and saw that it was the same woman. She was parked in the same general spot that I had seen her before. Remembering the previous events, I did not get out of my car right away. I wanted to see what she would do, so I stayed inside of my car. When I did, she did the same thing. After 10 minutes, the woman had not gotten out of her vehicle, and neither did I. It was almost like she was watching me or something. Finally, I got tired of waiting, and I got out and I went in. The woman stayed in her car the entire time. By this point, I didn't know if I was being paranoid or if something weird was going on. I just tried to forget about everything. The next day, I didn't notice the woman at all, but the following one, I was staying up really late. It was much later than I usually do, probably like 1 or 2 a.m. I was just hanging out in the living room and watching movies on TV. Out of nowhere, I heard this noise that sounded like somebody was trying to open the door to my apartment. I looked over to the door and saw the knob starting to turn. Luckily, it was locked and it didn't open. I had no idea who would be trying to enter my place. I certainly don't have any friends that would just walk in. I expected someone to maybe knock on the door or something after that, but nobody did. I quietly got up from the couch and walked over to the door. When I got there, I looked through the peephole. I saw the same woman standing there on the other side. I could not believe it. Why was she trying to just enter my apartment in the middle of the night? I almost opened the door and confronted her, but I decided not to. Instead, I just kept watching her. She stood there right in front of my door for maybe 30 seconds. Then she just turned and walked away. I was left very confused, and since then, I haven't seen her. I don't know why this woman is seemingly stalking me. I'm pretty sure that she does not even live in the apartment complex. I've looked in the general area of the parking lot where she parked those times, and I haven't seen her car. I even saw a few of my neighbors in the hallways, and I asked them if they had ever seen the woman or know if she lives in the building. Nobody knew her. I'm hoping that I never see her again. I'm a female, and this happened one summer when I was home from college. During the summer, I was living at my parents' house and working at a retail store nearby. I remember that at one point, pretty early on, some guy messaged me on Instagram. I didn't pay his profile too much attention, but I could see that he was much older than me and that I didn't know him. He just said hi to me, but I did not respond. I've had random guys message me over the years, and usually I just ignore it, and most of the time they don't message again. However, this guy did not give up. He sent me another message on Instagram saying hi, and then a third one when I didn't respond to that. After that, I got annoyed and I blocked him, and I thought that was that, but that was not that. Probably the next day after I blocked him, I got a friend request from the same guy on Facebook. I declined it. I should have blocked him right then and there on Facebook, but I didn't. The next day, I saw that he had liked a bunch of my posts on Facebook and commented on some of my really old pictures and posts. He was making comments on the pictures of me, but he was also telling me to accept his friend request and stuff in the comments. At that point, I deleted all of his comments and then I blocked him on Facebook as well. I really didn't know who he was, but I didn't really care either. He was being a creep and shouldn't be messaging me when I clearly didn't want anything to do with him. After that, things were fine for a few days. But one day, when I was at work, he showed up at my job. The first time I saw him there, I didn't recognize him. I'd only seen his profile picture from the times that I was blocking him. I thought that he was just an average guy shopping at the store, and I wouldn't remember him from his picture. I was working as a cashier, but the guy approached me with no items, so I knew something was up. He then said hi and brought up the Facebook and Instagram stuff. He asked me why I kept blocking him, and he claimed to be a nice guy. That's when I realized who it was, and I was really creeped out, because to tell you the truth, I didn't even think this guy lived in the same state as me. I thought it was just some random guy on the other side of the country stalking me on social media. So when he said that in the store, I really didn't expect it. I remember he started asking me what time I was off of work and stuff. I did not tell him. and I told him instead that I was not interested and said that he should leave. At first, he acted all defensive and asked what my deal was, but eventually he walked away and left. However, he showed up at my job again several days later. This time, he did not come up to me and talk, but just walked around the store. I saw him pretending to shop and then look over at me a few times. He stayed there for about 30 minutes and then he left without buying anything. After that, I told my boss about it, and my boss said to let him know if the guy came back in the store. Well, luckily, I didn't see him in the store again. However, just a few days after this, I got home from work one night at about 8 p.m. or so. My parents were gone someplace, and so I was home by myself. About an hour after I got home, at roughly 9 o'clock, I heard a knock on the front door to the house. I left my bedroom and went to the living room window to look outside and see who was there before answering. When I did, I saw that the same guy was there. This was really creepy because I had no idea that he actually knew where I lived. I didn't waste any time and I got out my phone and I called the police. I told him that some guy was stalking me and he now showed up at my house. Then I went back to my bedroom and waited for the police to get there. For the next 10 minutes or so, I was on the line with the 911 operator. Thankfully, the man didn't break in or anything. Soon the police got there. They found the man in the backyard trying to find a way to enter the house. He was arrested and I told the police the whole story about him stalking me. I'm really glad that he was caught. I haven't seen the man since, and he's still not allowed within a good distance of me. I work a pretty typical office job in the city, and I live in a house about 15 minutes away. I drive the same route every day, and there's usually traffic by the city obviously, but closer to my house there's much less, especially in my neighborhood. I tell you this because one day I noticed this random woman following me home. For most of the drive I obviously didn't notice, but when I started approaching my neighborhood, things got quiet, and I noticed the same car making all the same turns as me. Eventually, we reached my street. I knew many of the cars that lived on my street, and this wasn't one of them. I looked in my mirror and saw a woman with blonde hair driving, but she was wearing sunglasses. On that first time that I noticed her, I just drove to my house as usual and pulled into my driveway. She drove right past, but did slow down a little. I wasn't 100% sure that she was following me, but I thought that she was. The very next day, I was driving home from work again, and I noticed the same car. This time, I thought that she had to be following me for sure, so when I got to my neighborhood, before pulling onto my street, I went around the block once. The car followed me the entire way, proving that this woman was deliberately following me. Then I went to my street again and pulled into my driveway. Once more, like the previous day, she just drove past. I kept an eye out my window that night a few times, but didn't see her or anything suspicious. So the next night, I noticed her following me again. I was getting frustrated now, and I decided to confront her. When I was almost to my neighborhood, I pulled over on the side of the road. At first, she started to pull over as well. Then she abruptly veered back onto the road and drove away. I continued with the rest of my drive home, not noticing her again that night. I was glad that she had stopped following me then, but she did also know where I lived anyways. I was trying to figure out who she was and stuff, and I didn't recognize her from what I saw, and I really couldn't think of anything. The next day after work, she was driving behind me once again. Now I really couldn't believe it. So many days in a row she was just following me home from work. Did this woman have nothing better to do? So around the same spot as the night before, I once again decided to pull over to the side of the road. That seemed to work the previous day. When I did so this time, however, she pulled over completely as well. Both of our cars then sat there on the side of a pretty quiet street. I then decided to get out. I was going to confront her and get to the bottom of it. But just as I stepped out, I saw the two rear doors of her car open up. These two large men both got out. They were much bigger than me and not nice looking guys at all. I had a bad feeling and I decided quickly to get back into my vehicle. So I jumped in and then quickly drove away from there. I saw in my mirror though the men running back to the car. They got in and soon the ladies started following me again and they were quickly able to catch up with me. At that point, I called the police. I reported how the same woman kept following me and stuff. I gave my address of where I was driving and I was told that the police were on their way. Unfortunately though, the woman stopped following me before the police arrived. She just randomly turned and went out of my sight. I still talked with the police about it that night. Unfortunately, there wasn't really much that could be done. I didn't get her license plate number, and I just knew the car type and very basic description of the people. The next day was a Saturday, so I didn't have to go to work. Instead, in the morning, I took my dog on a walk around the neighborhood. I try to walk my dog as much as possible, and he loves the exercise. So I remember that I got near a park just a couple of blocks from my house. As I was approaching the park, I saw two men walking down the street towards me. They were a long ways away, but I soon recognized them to be the same two men who had gotten out of the car with the woman. When I noticed them, I turned around and just sprinted with my dog all the way back home. I was able to make it, and I'm not even sure if the men chased me or not. I didn't see them or the woman for the rest of the day, and after that, I haven't seen any of them since. I haven't been followed home and haven't seen the lady or those guys. It's all very strange. I'm not sure what was going on there, why I kept getting followed, or what the men wanted. When I lived in the city, I would walk to and from work every day. It took about 15 minutes, and I disliked it when the weather was really cold, but normally it wasn't too bad. I would just take sidewalks and go along city streets to make it to my job. I obviously had an apartment that I lived in, and I lived there for several months. Some strange things happened, and I think I was being stalked though. The first time that I noticed it was one night when I got off of work kind of late. Normally, the sidewalks would not be super busy, but there were always people walking behind me. It's a pretty large city, and people are always out. However, sometimes I do work late, and in the really late hours, only a couple of other people might be walking. So when I was maybe like halfway back on this night, for whatever reason, I glanced behind me. I wasn't even aware of anybody being back there. But when I did, I saw a man walking down the sidewalk a long ways back. For some reason, he just looked suspicious to me. Maybe it was because he was wearing all dark clothing, a hooded sweatshirt, and looking down at the ground with his hands in his pockets. He was a really long ways back though, so I didn't get a great look at him. I kept walking, and like 5 minutes later, I turned around a corner and happened to hear footsteps a ways back. I looked over and saw the same guy, but now slightly closer. Over the next part of my route home, I turned 2 times in a matter of 2 blocks. To my surprise, the man made both of these turns with me. Now I was getting kind of suspicious. It was literally just the 2 of us on these streets, so I started walking faster. I really did not want this guy following me all the way to my building. After speeding up, I turned a corner super fast and then went into an alleyway. Then I went to the end of it and literally ran to another street. I was confident that I had lost the guy by then, and then proceeded with my route home. I made it back safely without seeing the guy. I was happy that I had lost him. About a week later or so, I got off of work kind of late again. It wasn't as late as the previous time that I was followed, so there were a few more people out on the sidewalks. But once again, I noticed what appeared to be the same guy walking a ways behind me. He made all the same turns that I did leading up to my building, and he was about the same distance from me as before. Once more, I'm pretty sure at the exact same spot, I tried to lose him again. I ran around a corner, went through an alleyway, and then out to another street, and once more, it seemed to work. I didn't see the guy, so I quickly then walked the rest of the way back home. I was able to make it back to my apartment safely. Once I was inside though, my phone started ringing. It was later at night, so I didn't know why somebody would be calling me. I looked, and it was from a number that I didn't know. I answered out of curiosity, already feeling creeped out. When I did, I just heard breathing on the other end. I wasn't sure who it was. I asked who was there multiple times, but got no answer. Then they hung up on me. After that, I was really freaked out by the whole thing and started taking a cab to and from work. This seemed to work, and I didn't get followed or see the guy. But not long into this, and I received another phone call from the same number late at night. It was the same thing as before, just breathing on the other end before someone hung up on me, whoever it was. I blocked the number. I have to think that person and the person following me were linked. In fact, I think it was probably the same guy. It's too crazy for it not to be. So after that, I ended up moving to a different city just about a month later. I didn't move because of the incidents, but because of my job. I would have to move sort of frequently, but I was actually glad to get out of that city for the possible guy stalking me. Nothing like that has happened since. I live alone in a smaller house in a busy neighborhood. This is something that happened not too long ago. I remember that one day I was outside doing some gardening. I love plants and I like to take care of the small garden that I have in the front yard. As I was tending to it, I noticed a man walking down the street out front. It's a busy neighborhood, like I said, so nothing was unusual there. I didn't recognize the guy, but that was not a big deal either. However, I noticed him walking back from the other direction just about 10 minutes later. Then I saw him again walking back like 5 to 10 minutes after that. The guy didn't really seem to be walking with much purpose either. He was just kind of looking around, and I remember that we made eye contact for a second before he looked away. Just his behavior struck me as a little suspicious. After he walked away that time though, he did not return for the rest of the time that I was outside that day. I forgot all about him until a few days later when I was outside doing some gardening again. When I was out there, I saw him walking by again. This time, he stopped and appeared to be looking at me. I saw him and I stopped, wondering why he was just staring at me. At that point, he started to walk towards my yard. I walked over to him and met him at the edge of my property. The guy said hi and told me that he was a neighbor. I said hi, and then he basically just said bye and walked down the street again. He seemed kind of strange, but I didn't think too much of it. I just went back to gardening. I do remember him walking by again as I was gardening there though. Several days went by and I didn't see him, although I didn't go out gardening on those days. Then, one night, I was woken up very late to a sound. The first thing I remember was hearing this weird noise from a back window leading to the living room. I got up from my bed and went to my bedroom doorway. That's when I heard glass breaking. It wasn't very loud like it was being smashed, but instead quieter. I could still tell that it was being broken though. I realized that somebody was breaking into my house. I closed my bedroom door and locked it, and then quickly got my phone and called the police. I reported a break-in and went to the far back corner of my room away from the door. I sort of heard someone walking in the house, but hoped that they wouldn't go near me. I tried to stay quiet and hide in my room. After maybe 2 or 3 minutes, I heard footsteps in the hallway. They got closer to my bedroom door, and I was terrified. Soon, whoever it was tried the handle, which was locked. After the door didn't open, they slowly walked away. I hoped this meant they were leaving, but it didn't. Just about 2 or 3 minutes after that, I heard footsteps approaching in the hallway again. But before they reached my door, they once again turned around and walked away, this time rather quickly. Around that same time, I also heard cars driving down the street outside. I realized that the police had gotten there. The person in my house tried leaving, but they were caught. It turned out to be the same man who I kept seeing walking by when I was gardening. And as it turns out, he was not even a neighbor. He lived in the next city over, but he had somehow been stalking me for weeks. They found photos of me in his house, some from my social media and others taken of me gardening without my knowledge. I was very creeped out by that, but I'm really glad that the guy was caught.